Everyone. Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see you all. We're very pleased today to have our members of our top-notch consultant team, Weston and Sampson, who are working on developing the regional flood model for the Deerfield River watershed. And I'm looking at my screen and I see I think everyone on the Resilient Deerfield River Watershed Coalition has attended before, and so we all know each other. I do see Emma Sass, who is one of our awesome MVP regional coordinators. So welcome, Emma. And I think, Indrani, did you want to introduce your team before we jump right into the presentation about the regional flood model?
Yeah, absolutely happy to. Kimberly, I didn't know if we were going to do sort of like around the table with the participants here as well, and then the consultant team can take it on.
Actually, that's a great idea, Indrani. Why don't we do that really quickly, just so you all know kind of which towns are being represented here. That's a great idea. So I'll just call on people as I see them on my screen. I'll start with Star.
Hello, my name is Star Atkinson, and I'm the Secretary to Boards in Charlemont.
Great, thank you. Will? Oh, Will, we can't hear you. Oh, we still can't hear you. Oh, now we can hear you.
You can hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I'm the select board chair for the town of Hawley. I'm also on the Conservation Commission.
Great, thank you, Will. Carolyn.
Deerfield MVP committee chair and longtime involvement through the conservation districts in the Deerfield watershed.
Great, thank you. Trisha.
I am Trisha Yakovon-Biaggi, the Shelburne MVP coordinator.
Wonderful. Janet.
Janet Shays from Conway. I'm chair of the Open Space Committee and longtime activist for the Friends of the South River.
Wonderful. Thank you, Janet. Steve.
I'm Steve Goodgen. I'm on the Ashfield Select Board.
Thank you, Steve. John.
Hi, John LaCour. Let me get my visual. Get the audio. Is that working?
Yes.
No, but there you go.
All right, I just walked in the door. I just logged in, so I don't know what's going on. We're just introducing or?
Yes, we're just doing a very quick round of introductions.
Okay, super. Thanks. John Lepore, Pioneer, excuse me. Bruce Planning Board, and also just guy that's really interested in waterways.
Great, thanks, John. Jessica.
Hi, I'm Jessica Spiegel. I'm the conservation agent with the city of Greenfield.
Thank you, Jessica. And Emma, did you want to say anything?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Emma Sass, she, her pronouns, and I'm the MVP regional coordinator for the Berkshires and Hill Towns. So good to be here. Thanks.
Thanks, Emma. All right, Indrani.
Thank you so much. We are very excited to be a part of this project. We'll do a quick round of introductions. I'm Indrani Ghosh. I lead our climate resiliency practice at Weston Sampson, and I am a water resources engineer by training, have been working with Andy on a number of these watershed scale resilience projects, and we're very excited to be doing one of the first in Western Mass with you all and talking about our findings for this phase. With that, I'll hand it off to Andy and Madeline to do introductions, and then we'll go through the slides.
I'm Andy Walker. Since Johnny said, we've worked together on a number of projects in the last 5-6 years, including the Charles and Neponset River flood models that potentially inspired this one. I'm a hydrologist by training. So I'll be spearheading the development of the flood model itself. And have a team of hydrologists supporting me. Madeline?
Hi, everyone. I'm Madeline Green. I am also an engineer at Weston and Sampson, and this is my first experience with this project, so I'm very excited to learn more about it. And it's nice to meet you all.
Great. So our agenda for today is really quickly going over the project goals and deliverables. You'll hear a lot from Andy about the model development process that we have embarked on initially in this phase, and then we'll give you an update of where we are with the overall timeline, the tasks that have been completed to date for this current fiscal year, which is coming to a close in a few weeks by the end of this month. But then we'll also speak about the upcoming work that we have in in year 2 of this project. And then we'll walk you all through some example deliverables and what you would expect to see at the end of the completion of this project.
Indrani, may I ask, how would you all like to receive any questions? Would you like people, since we're a small group, just people kind of raise their hands or pop in, or would you like them to hold the questions till the end?
I think we're good with having questions be asked in between. I think I'm seeing Andy nod as well. And I think if we can monitor the chat as well, Madeline and I will monitor the chat while Andy is speaking, and we'll sort of take turns to do that. But then if you all have questions related to the slides, we can please feel free to raise your hands, and we will take questions and potentially try to answer it while we're on the slide, while it's on top of everyone's mind.
Thank you.
We introduced ourselves. I just want to mention Emily DeFranco is the project manager. Emily had something prior in her calendar, which was not possible to move. And so Andy, Madeline, and I are covering on behalf of the team. So we wanted to recap some of the impetus for this project, which Kimberly and Farkog led to develop the MVP grant application, and some of the guiding principles of why we're doing this project sort of is really embedded in the fact that to better understand flood risks, sort of both looking at pluvial and fluvial, it's really critical for us to develop a flood model that sort of is at the watershed scale that transcends municipal jurisdictional boundaries, so we can better understand the sources of flooding, where the risks are today, how the risks are likely to be exacerbated. So looking at the essence of this project sort of is based on developing a watershed scale flood model to understand precipitation-driven flood risks. And that sort of segues into the fact that it is critical for you all as a group of communities to understand where your risks are, but then also to be able to prioritize and coordinate your flood mitigation efforts, knowing how stretched and constrained resources are these days, and how, with those limited resources, having this information in terms of understanding how soon you need to take action, where you need to focus and prioritize your action is really critical. As I mentioned, understanding where the risks are today, you all have already have a lot of institutional knowledge and understanding of that, but where are new emerging risks related to flooding that are likely to occur? And by when are they likely to occur? How are they likely to get exacerbated in the future? Are some of the questions that we will be able to answer through this project. So that's sort of like a little bit of the grim picture, but then what this project will unfold is also where we would likely to see the most promise in terms of flood mitigation strategies, and what types of flood mitigation strategies would be most beneficial to mitigate flooding. And again, this project will enable you all to look beyond your municipal and jurisdictional boundaries to look at what would happen at the watershed or the sub-watershed scale. What actions you take in one part of the watershed will have benefits in a downstream area, or vice versa. And will also help you to assess if projects at one location can cause inadvertent impacts in another location. And then overall, this information through that you will be able to get from this project will overall improve your public safety and flood preparedness and responsive strategies related to emergency management efforts. So this was just a quick recap of the goals: developing a climate resilient watershed planning framework. Through this project, you will be able to identify what vulnerable as well as critical infrastructure assets, systems, and also let's not forget what the priority population groups in the Deerfield River watershed, how they are likely to be impacted as a result of flooding, and what we would need to protect them by defining strategies and prioritizing actions. And then this project sort of is the culmination of regional collaboration. The fact that you all are here together in the same room and sort of really is, and that's not this project, you all have been working together for a very long time, but this sort of is one of the underpinning principles of the MVP program, is how best these projects can foster regional collaboration and coerce regional action. This is a quick recap of our project deliverables, and Andy is going to dive more into the details of this, but really this project that FORCOG led and Kimberly secured the MVP Action Grant spans across 2 fiscal years, FY25 and FY26. So the one that we're ending now by June 30th. This year one, we will be doing an inventory of all the existing data. We've started developing GIS shapefiles that form the skeleton of the flood model. We formalized and finalized our field investigations plan that will lead to doing the field data collection early in summer. We will be recapping today the summary of flow and precipitation data, as well as we will be going over the training materials and the information that has already that we have prepared and done as part of the stakeholder training efforts that have happened over the last few weeks. And then into FY26, as I mentioned, we'll go through the field data collection effort will be a big component that will help us update the flood model. Going into that, we will be able to do our calibration and validation exercise that will then lead us to be at a point where we will be able to understand the flood risks with no action taken in the watershed, right? And then that will help us understand where nature-based solutions and where green infrastructure strategies are likely to where the flood risks are and where nature-based solutions are likely to work. And that will sort of be also the essence of our work in the latter part of next year. And then we'll be wrapping all of this up by the end of next year with presentation materials and tech memos. Andy, do you want to talk about the model development process?
Absolutely. This is my favorite part. Indrani talked about the general layout of the project, and really a lot of it is geared around developing this regional flood model and then using it to evaluate present and future flood risk and potential mitigation strategies and solutions at the watershed or sub-watershed scale. So I'll just speak for a bit about the model development process, and then talk about some of the model development tasks that we've already conducted so far this spring and what's to come, getting into some of the specifics. But big picture, the idea is, there's been a lot of fantastic projects, reports, data sets developed in this watershed already. And so we don't want to start from square one. We want to harness all that fantastic data. And so, whether that's, drainage infrastructure, GIS, or dam inventories or culvert assessments, whatever it is, starting with that existing data, identifying some of the data gaps, right? Which structures are not well represented in existing data just yet, going out in the field and gathering those measurements, elevations, observations, kind of bringing that back and combining it with the data we already had in hand and beginning to build the model. And then there's a process of calibrating the model to make sure that it's producing reliable outputs. I'll talk a little bit about that. But then once we have this model developed and calibrated and trust its outputs, we can start to use it to evaluate some of those watershed-wide strategies or sub-watershed solutions that Indrani mentioned, and to start to prioritize. So understanding which strategies are perhaps more effective, so the communities can prioritize one over the other and inform their approach to flood mitigation, and supporting building safer, resilient, climate resilient communities, and helping communities spend their dollars as efficiently as possible. Big picture about what a flood model is, right? This model is developed at a watershed scale. So there's lots of different kinds of hydrologic and hydraulic models. Some of them are very small, maybe focused on a particular site, and how stormwater is managed on that single individual site. Some of them are developed at a neighborhood scale, perhaps, and might include a number of storm drain systems. This is being developed at the watershed scale. But at their heart, they're the same, right? These H&H models need to account for precipitation landing on the land surface, representing how the land responds to that rainfall. And then once that runoff is produced and goes into streams and ponds and lakes, how does it interact with the natural channels and setting? How does it interact with pipe systems like storm drains? And how does it interact with the different river and stream crossings like dams and culverts and bridges? And so we're developing this at the watershed scale, right? Because that speaks to the goals of the project is this regional collaboration. And when it comes to, we've got some other slides on this as well, but this model developed at the watershed scale, there's something like 149 different streams that we envision incorporating into this model. There's a heavy focus. Obviously, the watershed spans both Vermont and Massachusetts. It's very nearly a 50-50 split, but we're the grant funding and the active communities are primarily in Massachusetts. The level of detail in the Massachusetts portion of the watershed in the model will be much more detailed. But in that area, there's 149 individual streams. We anticipate modeling 21 different ponds and lakes across 20 communities. And something like 35,000 citizens. This is a setting. I'll talk just a little bit about some of the key pieces of these types of models. One of the first things we develop is sort of the 1D framework. It's like the skeleton of the model, and it starts with identifying all the river and stream center lines of those waterways that we want to include in the model. You can kind of see that on the right. You can see where we've identified the stream center lines. And then we break those up, particularly around dams and stream crossings, right? So you can see we've added two little blue junctions there, and there's a small conduit across that roadway that will represent that culvert or that bridge. And you can see we've done the same thing down here. So it's hundreds, if not thousands, of these center lines and culverts and bridges and crossings. And it's a series of junctions and conduits. And then each one of those is assigned different dimensions or elevation data. And so we've already outlined that, and you'll see some more slides on this, but that's what we've been working on this spring, is outlining that 1D skeleton. And then once we have that 1D skeleton, we're going to start to represent the land surface. So we delineate this 600+ square mile watershed into hundreds, if not thousands, of subcatchments. And those subcatchments will be delineated so we have a really nice sense of the runoff arriving at key locations in the watershed. And those will be delineated based on the different hydrology in different areas of the watershed and any pipe systems and the presence of culverts and dams and things. But like I said, hundreds, if not thousands, of subcatchments. And those subcatchments, their job is to represent how the land converts rainfall to runoff, right? Taking into account things like infiltration and storage and other runoff characteristics. And then over the top of that, over the top of the 1D framework, is a 2D mesh. We lay that over the top, and the role of the 2D mesh is really threefold. The first is to account for flood stage flows, right? As water, the 1D conduits of those rivers and streams, those just represent that channel itself. But during storm events, right? We all know that there's lots of water that moves down the floodplain, sometimes creating impacts. And so the 2D mesh helps us account for all that water moving downstream in the floodplain. It also helps us represent all the storage in the floodplain. Not only does the floodplain help move flow from upstream to downstream, but there's a lot of storage there as well. And so the 2D mesh helps represent that. And the third thing is the 2D mesh is useful in understanding the extents of flooding during different storm events, the extents and depths and velocities and flow directions during those flood events. That's where some of the best output from the model will come from, as you'll see shortly. Right. So once we develop the 1D framework, we build the 2D mesh over the top of it. We have subcatchments to convert rainfall to runoff, and it's getting into the streams and into the floodplains. We want to calibrate the model and validate it. We do that by trying to by modifying the model to reproduce historical events, to make sure that it's able to reproduce that the flooding extents and depths and characteristics that it reproduces are similar to what was historically observed during that same rainfall event. And so there's a process we go through to do just that. And then once we have a model we're really comfortable with and trust its output, we can run those hypothetical design storms like your 100-year, 24-hour, or your maybe a high-intensity, short-duration event like we get sometimes in the summer with those thunderstorms. We might run a 2-year, 6-hour event. We can run those design storms through the model, and it gives us an understanding of flooding characteristics under sort of an existing conditions or no action condition. That's the big picture of how we develop these models, and I'll go into some more specifics about what we've done already. Before I get there, I know Indrani spoke to this a little bit, but this just gives an idea of the timeline. Indrani spoke generally to this, but you can see this project spans 2 calendar years and also 2 fiscal years. We've done the work shown in green. Those tasks are complete or very, very nearly complete. We've been working hard on those things this spring, and we're just about on track. And so next month we'll start to dive into those blue tasks. Right? So the very next thing is field data collection, and then we'll use that information to continue building the model. I mentioned, right, so speaking of some of the work we've completed already, the very first thing we did was review all of the existing data sets and kudos and thank you to FERCog and others for helping connect us with those reports and data sets. Just about 24 different data sources were reviewed for this project. We tracked this all spring with this. Here's a snip of the spreadsheet we use. You can see we've tracked where does this data set come from? Who can we reach out to if we have questions about it? FERCog and Weston & Sampson sort of divvied up some of the data gathering. But mostly the work revolved around sort of reviewing these and understanding what information was contained in these reports and data sets that could be of use to putting these models together, right? So 7 of those data sets were useful in that they provided better understanding of the geometry of the channels. 9 of those data sets had really useful information on crossings, whether that's the size of the openings or the elevation of the openings. We had 1 stormwater GIS, and so lots of different data was reviewed. We kind of extracted all the useful pieces from each one of these, and there was some overlap, but a really robust set of existing reports and data sets.
Andy, I just wanted to mention, I know we're jumping into the data collection piece, but since we talked about the model development, I was just wondering if it would be helpful to take a quick pause to see if there are any questions before we dive further into the data collection. So just providing that opportunity.
Yeah, sure.
I don't know if there were any clarifying questions. Go ahead, Kimberly.
I was just going to say everyone is on mute just to reduce the background noise, etc. So if you do have a question, please unmute yourself. Oh, it looks, I see Carolyn. Okay.
I was just wondering if we could get a set, of the slides sent to us so that we could print it out to study it, because this is a lot of information to take in.
Yes, I think that we can certainly do that, and we can also post them to the project webpage as well. So thanks, Carolyn. Let's see, Trisha, did I see your hand?
Yes, my hand's up, Kimberly. My chat is disabled, so I was not able to. I had a question, but it's not pertinent to what Indrani just asked about, so I'm going to hold it till later, but I can't put it in the chat yet.
Oh,
You could
okay.
fix that. Yep. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Trisha. Audrey, can you check that?
Yeah, I can try to figure it out.
Okay, thank you. Emma, did you have a question? No.
Thanks.
Let's see. Did anybody else?
I see Janet and Star with their hands raised.
Oh, great. Okay. Janet.
Yeah, quick question on this rainfall data, the location. I'm wondering if that's all of them, because we have a monitor at the South River in Conway.
Oh,
What
okay.
happened to that?
Yeah, I can certainly speak to this. Were there questions about things that have already happened, and then I'm happy to dive into this.
Okay, hold that thought for just a sec. Star, did you have a question?
Yeah, it's just a quick one. Is the model something that municipalities can play around with? Like, is it?
Oh, yeah, we'll see a little bit about that later.
So it's sort of like software that everyone that's accessible?
Yes, we're gonna, Weston and Sampson is gonna show us kind of what the model is going to look like at the end, and how our towns can use it. So great question. So was that it for questions? And then we can circle back to Janet's about the rainfall data? I think so. Okay.
Thanks, everybody. Yeah, don't hesitate to hop in and ask questions. So the rainfall data we're showing here, we need historical rainfall data to help us calibrate the model. And I spoke a little bit about that. And we've got a nice slide on it in a little bit, but the way we do that is we have stream flow data, USGS gauge stream flow data in the watershed, and we have high quality rainfall data ideally in or surrounding the watershed. And we use the model, we simulate those historical rainfall events in the model, and we should see in our simulated Deerfield rivers and Green rivers and the other waterways, we should see similar runoff responses, similar storm responses in those waterways as is observed by the USGS stream gauges. And so to support that calibration process, we need high quality, sort of robust rainfall data. And so we tend to use gauges that have been vetted by the National Weather Service. We also need high frequency rainfall data. So most gauges will only report rainfall on a daily basis, so that it's only sort of observed and recorded once per day. And that's great information. It's not helpful to the calibration process. So we need hourly data. Ideally, we would have sub-hourly data so that the changes in rainfall intensity and depths over short periods of time get reflected in our model simulation of those historical events. And so that's why you see these gauges here, right? Ideally, we would have used, and there are gauges inside within the watershed. Unfortunately, we didn't find any that had hourly or sub-hourly, ideally sub-hourly data inside the watershed. However, there are five really nice long-term hourly or sub-hourly rainfall data sets that are part of the National Weather Service sort of program that are really nice options, and they do a nice job of sort of straddling the watershed. So there's gauges sort of on all sides. And so we can use the data at those gauges to help understand some of the nuances of how those historical rain events occurred throughout the watershed, because it is a large watershed, hundreds of square miles, and the storms, these large historical events did not occur the same at the north end of the watershed or the south end. And so we want to make sure we're able to capture some of those nuances, because we'll see that in the streamflow response. Does that answer your question, Janet?
Oh, Janet, you're on mute if you.
Just make sure that you did look at all of these other rain gauges and determined that they're not hourly.
We did do that, yep.
Okay.
And if you have a particular gauge that you think would be of high value, happy to sort of investigate that a little bit further and make sure that we haven't crossed something out that we shouldn't have.
How do those of us left out get our monitors converted to hourly? Is that something that's plausible for the future?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I think many of the hourly or sub-hourly gauges, they're automated, so it's not a person reading them at the end of the day or at the same time every day. I think they tend to be automated, so it's more expensive equipment, but it can be
yeah.
done.
I mean, ours is automated.
Okay.
I wonder if I'm just jumping in here because I wonder if Tricia also had a question or pointed out that there's a storm gauge on the North River. So I wonder if we're all talking about the same thing, if we're talking about rain gauges and stream flow gauges. Like, I just wanted to be clear, like there is a USGS stream gauge on the North River and the South River, but they don't necessarily have the rainfall data that you're referring to.
That helps solve that question.
Yeah.
Yes. So I'll skip a slide. I think this is what you're thinking of. So we want really high quality rainfall data from large historical events, and we want high quality stream flow data from those same events so that we can simulate the rainfall event in the model and make sure we're producing the stream or river response that happened in real life. And if we can, then it tells us that our model is reliable and produces outputs that we can kind of plan around. So the idea is we'll use those 5 rainfall gauges to understand the nuances of the rainfall during those historical events. And then there's 4 USGS streamflow gauges, and so these will provide us river flow at 15-minute intervals and at 4 different locations. I think there's 2 on the Deerfield. There's 1 on the North River, which is perhaps the one you were thinking of, and then there's also 1 on the Green River. We did look, there are none in Vermont, but there are 4 high quality long-term gauges in the watershed, and we will certainly be making use of those as part of our calibration effort.
So the South River one didn't have enough useful data. I think that was what Janet was referring to.
Sure, I will have to look into the South River gauge in particular. I know that there are a number of other USGS maintained gauges. Some of them do not record at regular intervals. Some of them are for water quality observations or average daily information. But these 4 have 15-minute interval flow data, which is really useful to us. But we can absolutely look into the South River gauge location.
Okay, great, thanks.
Now just go back a slide here. Not only are we interested in historical rainfall data, we're also interested in design rainfall depths, right? These, when somebody says that, oh, the 100-year, 24-hour storm event, this is the information that they're referring to. So these hypothetical storm events are associated with a depth of rainfall. And what you see here are the present day and potential future design rainfall depths for a wide range of storm events, ranging from the 2-year to the 500-year, for 4 different climate scenarios. The first is a present day or baseline climate. This is from NOAA Atlas 14, which many of you I'm sure are familiar with. And then we're also showing the design rainfall depths associated with those same events under 3 potential future climate scenarios, 2030, 2050, and 2070, using different warming scenarios. And this data is pulled using the Resilient Massachusetts design standards tool, which I imagine many of you are familiar with as well. And we love this graph. We show this graph on just about all of our projects. It's really telling, right? So when we look at the 500-year rainfall depth of today, you know, what is it, 8.5 inches? We look across at 2070, and that looks to be less, even more frequent than the 100-year storm. So it looks like about the 100-year storm in 2050, and maybe, you know, the 70-year storm in 2070. So what's an extreme storm event today will become significantly more common in the latter half of this century. We see that's true for smaller storms as well. Right? When we look at the 25-year storm of today, you know, 5.25, 5.25 inches. You know, we kind of look across. By 2070, that's somewhere between the 5 and between the 2 and the 10-year event, maybe somewhere around the 5-year in 2070. So some really significant increases in the frequency of these rainfall events.
And Andy, I would just jump in to mention here to the group that these are projections, as Andy mentioned, very specific to your area, to the Deerfield River watershed. And these are derived from the work that Cornell University has done for the state project, the Climate Resilience Design Standards tool, as Andy mentioned, and it's also being incorporated or has been incorporated into the state's hydro risk project. So this is really the best available science and data that the state has developed through other concurrent efforts, and that's sort of the essence of MVP, is that we use the best available climate data, and that's what we're doing by looking at these specific projections for the Deerfield River watershed. So we're happy certainly to dive more into the details of this, but as Andy mentioned, like there are very stark findings that show the pretty significant increase in or intensification of both frequency and intensity of the storms in the future.
Thanks, Andrani. So we're gonna combine, I've mentioned this, we're gonna combine historical rainfall and streamflow data and use this to calibrate the model. We anticipate using, we sort of reviewed some of the more extreme flood events that have occurred in the watershed. I'm sure you folks are intimately familiar with those. We anticipate using Tropical Storm Irene in 2011 as our primary calibration event. It occurred in August. There's no snow melt or rain falling on snow to sort of complicate things. We'll sort of a really clean response. It's one of, if not the most significant flood event that many communities in the watershed have experienced during the periods where we have rainfall and streamflow data. And we also like it because it's a relatively recent event, so it's fresh in folks' minds. So it makes a nice event to calibrate around. Not only do we calibrate, but we also validate. So all the changes, all the tweaks we make to the model to make it more realistic, more accurate during that calibration process. We always try to keep one more event off to the side, and we don't run that event until we feel we've fully calibrated the model, and then we take that event we've been holding aside and we run that through, and that's called our validation. So all the changes we made, all the assumptions we made, we want to validate those and make sure that they're appropriate for a totally different storm event or a totally different flow condition. So one of the events we have in mind for that process is the more recent July 2023 event where 3 to 9 inches, depending where you are in the watershed, fell over 24 hours, July 10th to the 11th. So these are the types of storms that we'll be calibrating and validating around. We also love these because not only can we use USGS streamflow data to make sure that our model's on track, but we can also use surveyed high water marks for Tropical Storm Irene in particular. So it's sort of a whole other set of data that can help us calibrate. So we love that. Diving into to some other work, so we've already started developing the model, right? We've reviewed existing data, and we've started to use that to lay out the bones of the model. first thing we did was take a look at the watershed, right? So it's, I've mentioned this before, it straddles Vermont and Massachusetts, 20 communities in Massachusetts alone, 16 more in Vermont, very nearly a 50-50 split. As I said, we'll be a lot more detail will be used in the Massachusetts portion of the watershed, but we're not going to forget about the Vermont portion. That's important to represent too, because all the runoff coming out of Vermont impacts downstream Massachusetts communities, and we want to make sure the model has a really nice representation of that. And so the first thing we started doing, as I mentioned, the first thing we do is lay out that 1D framework, the spine of the model, the skeleton of the model. We've laid out 294 miles of stream centerline that will be included in the model up the Deerfield and its many tributaries. We've selected the streams that we included are any waterway that was that's included in the effective or preliminary FEMA flood insurance studies for the watershed. So we wanted to make sure we include those. FEMA tends to include those because they're likely to have impacts to health and human safety. So we wanted to make sure this model has those too. We also included smaller streams that either had noteworthy impoundments of significant size that could influence stream flow and runoff downstream, or had significant or high hazard dams on them, or were close to critical infrastructure, schools, hospitals, fire stations, and the like. So it's, like I said, 294 miles of river have been included in this 1D framework. Within that framework are over 300 culverts and bridges and 53 dams. We've also included nearly 7 miles of storm drain in Greenfield. While we haven't developed the 2D mesh yet, we have taken a stab at outlining where we want to put the mesh. In total, we have about 31 square miles where we anticipate developing that 2D mesh. That's what you see on the left. This is sort of the outline of where we anticipate including 2D components in this model. You'll notice we're not including 2D in the Vermont portion of the watershed. That's primarily because 2D models are incredibly computationally intensive. They take a long time to run. And so there's this balancing act between adding lots and lots of detail to the model, but also developing a model that can run in a reasonable amount of time so we can complete the project on time. And so there's a balancing act. So part of that decision making was, let's focus on Massachusetts. These are the communities that are part of the grant and are active in the project. So we've focused the 2D there. And we have the 2D extents are informed by some of the existing reports and data sets. The stream power study in particular. They also tend to represent areas. We try to include all areas that would be included in the FEMA 500-year floodplain where it was available. So this May, 31 square miles, at some point, we're gonna run the biggest event that will be part of the project. It's often the 2070 100-year event. We'll run that through the model, and we may trim the 2D extents, right? 2D cells that never get wet, even during this massive event, they don't need to be in the model. So we may change this, but we've taken a pretty good stab at where we expect that 2D extent to be. And it will look like this. You can see that I see a hand raised. Happy to take that question. I'll just show over here. You can see the 2D cells have lots of different sizes. This is an example from a model also using the PC Swim software. This is at a Rhode Island, for a Rhode Island municipality. It's just a nice example. You can see 50-foot 2D cells down here, and then a 25-foot here. And then right here where we wanted a lot of detail, we went down to 4 to 8 foot resolution. Now these are quite a bit smaller than we'll include in this, in the Deerfield, but it gives you an idea of how we can manipulate the size of the 2D cells to get more detail in areas that are critically important.
My question is related to, are you going to do the models as if the Connecticut is involved in the event or not? in the examples that you used, in Irene, the Connecticut was not involved. And so we had all the flooding in the Deerfield River watershed, and the velocity whooshed out and took an extreme amount of soil from the town of Deerfield agricultural fields, the best top 5% in the world, ended up in Long Island Sound. In the July event, the Connecticut was involved, and it was backed up and raised. And what happens is the Green River and the Deerfield River then back up into Deerfield, and it creates another entirely different kind of flooding event. So
Absolutely.
it would be really important for us at the bottom of the bowl to have, Deerfield specific watershed events, and then also if the Connecticut is involved, because it's two different kind of events to respond to.
Interesting. So certainly we will consider events where the Connecticut River is flowing highly, or where it's flowing more at more normal water levels. We'll consider both when we're kind of calibrating and validating the model. That's a really interesting point. When it comes to selecting what design events you all want to see run through the model, right? Obviously, there's dozens of design events that we could run through the model, and I think it'll just be a matter of selecting, which ones are most valuable to the communities. But it certainly sounds like it makes good sense to include at least some of both types.
Yes, I mean, we have two different evacuation plans based on whether if the Connecticut is involved or not. We have, different responses. I mean, if I know that there's 10,000 CFS coming through the Charlemont monitoring station, I know that I'm in trouble. So at the Stillwater Bridge area, and that my roads are going to start flooding at that point. And so that's why it's depending on the way the event, it really is important to whether this is, a Deerfield specific watershed event, or it includes the entire, Connecticut watershed.
Absolutely understood. Well, the model will certainly be set up so that it can evaluate flooding in the Deerfield River watershed communities under a variety of Connecticut River flood stage conditions, and that way it will be set up to be, it'll set up to be able to do that, and it'll just be a matter of which design events you all select for us to run as part of this project. And I think that this presentation is probably the first step in getting communities to think about which events they may want to see. And we've got a slide on that later, which might be helpful in keeping that conversation going. Any other questions before I move on? As you saw, there's
Andy, I will just mention I've been typing some of the answers in the chat to the questions that have come in the chat. So if there are clarification responses that are needed, feel free, please, to raise your hand. I know there's lots of great questions in the chat, and just wanted to mention that as we move along. Thank you.
Okay. And Star had a question.
Just quickly, could you explain what 2D mesh is? Like, what are the 2Ds? Like, is it depth? Like, I just didn't really understand those 2D cells were.
I think of these models as like the 1D is the skeleton, is the bones, and then the 2D mesh is the meat, the skin. It overlays the skeleton. The way it works is all these little junctions, see the little blue junctions, these are communicating with the 2D cell that overlays it. So water can go from the stream channel into the 2D cell, which represents the floodplain, and it can do it at a number of locations along this stream alignment. And once the water gets into that 2D mesh, it can flow sideways too, and it can go to different areas of the floodplain. So you can see here, like we have a subcatchment that comes down to this little point in a wetland, which communicates with a 2D mesh here, and it floods all the different corners of that wetland. Does that help?
Not really, but
no.
I mean,
try me again.
Well, I guess, can you just like explain it to a 5-year-old?
Okay. The 1D components, the junctions and the nodes, they represent the water that flows in the channel, stays in the banks. The 2D mesh, the little hexagons or oddly shaped cells, they represent water flowing over land. In some cases, it stays close to a river or stream and just represents, flow in the floodplain. And sometimes it goes quite far away from a stream and impacts buildings or parks or other critical infrastructure.
And
Okay.
Star, I'll add to that and say that one of the ways of thinking about the 2D model is really a model that helps you visualize the extents and depths of flooding. So like the 1D will just sort of give you, okay, these are my channels, this is where it's going to be overwhelmed, but it doesn't necessarily say when the banks get overwhelmed or when, the culverts are unable to convey the capacity, the floodwaters. Where does that flooding go? The 2D mesh helps dissipate that, as Andy was explaining, on the ground and tells you like, okay, this is how far the flooding will go, this is how deep the floodwaters will be, and this is how long the floodwaters are likely to be in that area. So it sort of gives a sense of space and dimension in terms of timing as well.
Right, okay. But it's
and in
still
this
just like water on the land. It's still like a depiction of water.
Yes.
Spread
In
out.
this example, there's a dam down here, there's a bridge here, and then there's 2 more bridges here. And what we were trying to understand was where we know this area floods all the time, but why? Is it because this culvert's undersized or this one? And so those 2D outputs help us understand very precisely where the flooding starts, where it goes, and it's not always the same. Sometimes at the beginning of a storm, it'll flood from one source, but at the end of the storm, it'll flood from a different source, kind of like in Deerfield with the Connecticut and the Deerfield. I'm sorry, in Greenfield with the Connecticut and Deerfield both contributing. Okay. I was worried that we wouldn't have enough to talk about, but now I'm feeling a little pressed for time, so I'm going to pick up the pace. In putting together the 1D framework, we identify, right, there's 324 crossings that are part of the model, 53 dams. We have a lot of information already for most of those, but not all of them. Some of them we don't have any data. So for these there's 71 crossings and 16 dams we don't have any data on. And others where this is sort of a range from worst to best. So there's some where we have all the data we could possibly want, and then there's some where we don't have any data. And so we've sort of prioritized these structures, which ones we want to visit in the field investigations. And so obviously we'll be focusing primarily on these 87 or so structures where we don't have any data. And then if we can get all those, we'll move on to the next row and see if we can visit these 9 structures. And we'll just kind of keep moving down. We have some field investigations coming up. Just a couple weeks ago, we did sort of a virtual field training. It was a presentation and a handout identifying what information we need at each structure. This is just a screenshot from that presentation showing some of the key measurements that we're going to want to take at each of these structures. And then, right, that was a virtual training, and then in early July, as water levels have receded from spring runoff, been a lot of rain this spring. We'll get out there and work with FERCog to actually collect these data and go around to these culverts and dams where we don't have enough. And we've developed a ArcGIS Survey 123 a collector app. We've sort of preloaded it with all of these locations that we want to visit, and we've developed a sort of a pre-made form. So you go to the site, you hit the location, and then you're prompted to enter specific information just to streamline the process. So data collection is sort of the same at each structure. It looks like there's a question, Janet.
Yeah, quick question. Who is this training for? Who are you training in this?
The virtual training was for some FERCog staff that will be helping us conduct the field investigations in July.
Okay.
So that's a summary of the work that's been conducted to date. So we're well on our way developing the model. We've identified data gaps, and we're going to get out there in July and start plugging those data gaps. And we'll use that information to refine the model, right? Adding all those measurements into the model and in the summer and early fall. And then we'll begin calibrating it to make sure that the results it produces are trustworthy, so to speak. And once we have this sort of robust, reliable model, we will be modeling those no action scenarios, the present and future climate scenarios that we talked about. We'll be modeling those in the fall, and then coming to you and presenting the findings of those no action simulations and presenting model development and calibration in the late fall. And then, of course, in the winter and spring of 2026, we'll be diving into mitigation strategies and solutions, although that's not shown on the slide. Quick note about the upcoming field work, right? We talked about where we wanted to go. You can see the colorful dots. Those are the 100 or so sites that we feel are top priority. And we've clustered them into groups of about 10 so that field teams can really focus in on one area of the watershed and not drive all over the place, right? That's what's going to take the most time on field days, is driving between sites. We'll actually only be at individual sites for 10 minutes or so. So to minimize drive time, we've clustered those into groups of 10. So ideally, we'll be doing one cluster in the morning, one cluster in the afternoon, or something like that.
People are interested. So it sounds like when someone asked like who's doing the training, like, I mean, is there an option for people who are interested to also take the training rather than just having it exclusively for COG employees? Not that that's bad, but it sounds like the question behind that, there might have been some interest in knowing how to get involved.
Oh, yeah, I'll take that. Andrew, I think at this point, given the level of effort that's needed and the data that needs to be collected, it's and the time constraints that we have, it's most efficient to have FERCOG staff do this work because our staff already has some basic training on culvert inventory methods. I think if there is interest from anyone on the call or in any town, let's talk about how, maybe somebody could accompany the staff as we're gathering the data. But you saw, with that density of dots on the map, we have to be so quick and efficient with trying to gather as much data as we can. And so that's why we decided to go with this approach. But so that being said, anyone who is interested in either observing or, maybe tagging along for a few of these when we are in your town, just let me know. And believe me, I have not done the field work myself, but in talking to staff who have, this is not fun. There's like a lot of poison ivy, there's slippery slopes, it is, it's pretty hard. It's pretty hard work too, to gather this data.
Thanks, Kimberly. Well, we're going to take all that data. Whoever gathers it, we're going to take all that data, use it to refine the model, fill those data gaps, and then we're going to calibrate the model. I've talked quite a lot about this. I won't dive too much more into it. Just to show, this is just a nice image that sort of shows the process. So this is data from the Charles regional flood model. So we used the March 2010 event, which was a big deal in Eastern Massachusetts, perhaps less so in Western Mass. But quite a lot of rainfall over several days. So the top graph is the rainfall, hourly rainfall. And then on the lower graph, the black line is what was recorded at the USGS stream flow gauge at Medway on the Charles River. Calibration is iterative. You try something, you see how it works. And then based on that, you make a best guess at how to improve it and you try again. And that's kind of what this is showing here. The dashed line was iteration 11. And we didn't love the way, right? It did a good job in the first few hours, days of the storm. But in the back end of the storm, it didn't match the USGS streamflow data very well at all. So we switched it, we tried something different. And that's what the solid gray line is, that, iteration number 12. And we felt like that was a better fit. Maybe it didn't match the peak quite so well, but overall the shape was much better. Yeah, Carolyn?
I was just wondering, how are you going to differentiate between Connecticut River involved events and Deerfield River only events, watershed events?
So the rainfall data will be used to, I've oversimplified it. I've said the rainfall data we get from those 5 gauges that surround the watershed, we're gonna use that to drive the model.
Okay.
And then we're gonna see what the model predicts for flows in the Deerfield and its major tributaries and compare that to USGS streamflow data. There's one piece I missed, which is at the very bottom of the model, there's something called a boundary condition, a downstream boundary condition. And we're gonna define that based on historical water levels in the Connecticut River, rather, that corresponds to the same event, the same hours.
Okay, all right. Thanks.
Yep. And then once we have a calibrated model, we'll be running these no action simulations. And we often try what you've seen the graphic on the left in an earlier slide. On the right is the tabular version of it. We like to look at it in tabular view as well. We try to recommend events that are not super similar. For instance, it doesn't make too much sense to run the 10-year event of today, 4.5 inches, and also run the 5-year event of 2030, which is also 4.5 inches. They will tend to produce the same flooding extents and depths. So we wouldn't recommend doing both of those. And so we typically show a table like this and highlight a range of design rainfall depths, right? So we've got something in the low 3s, the high 3s, the 4s, the 5s, 6, 7, 8, 9. So we try to select events that give a nice distribution of rainfall depths, but that are also nicely paired, right? It's often nice to have like the same recurrence interval event of present day, and then also for a future climate scenario. And we often try to use the same future climate scenario. So here I've taken a stab at it, right? If we run the 2-year of today and the 2-year of 2050, very different rainfall depths, and then the 10-year and the 10-year, the 100-year and the 100-year. This is just the start of the conversation. Kimberly, I don't know where you want to take that conversation exactly, but I would recommend that if communities, right, we can provide these slides. If communities want to take a look at this table and have thoughts and their own preferences, that they could send that information to you.
That would be great. And I'm sorry, I was like multitasking, trying to answer some of the information in the chat. So I think what I heard, Andrew, was that that you would love to get some feedback from folks about the information that's on this slide. I'm sorry, maybe you could just.
If so the idea, right, we can't we're not scoped, and you could never run all of these design storm events. It's too many, and honestly, it doesn't tell you too much more. So I think the name of the game is to pick a subset of these events that would be most useful to the watershed's planning. So if communities had thoughts on that, they could forward it to you.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think, Kimberly, to add to that, it would be helpful to have sort of the ideas or some of the scenario-based inputs that are coming in from this meeting to also be funneled through you, through FERCOG. Some of the questions that relate to the interactions between the Deerfield and the Connecticut River watersheds, and how some of these what-if scenarios that go possibly beyond just the rainfall climate scenarios. I think it'll be helpful for that to be funneled through FORCOG. And then I think, at one of our check-in meetings with the project steering committee, we can sort of brainstorm on how best to evaluate that. And, as Andy mentioned, we certainly want to evaluate some of these plausible scenarios, but then there's also an information overload that could happen with modeling lots of scenarios that are fairly close to each other and not necessarily telling distinctly a very clear story or narrative.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And also we had given folks a homework packet after the last meeting. And so that was another way we were hoping to gather information that would either directly provide data to populate the model, or as we're looking at the different simulations and plugging in the potential projects, it would, we would have some context for that work. So Carolyn.
I just wanted to bring up the flooding event of 2005. That was my first big event. So I cannot really remember if the Connecticut was involved or not, but there was a huge amount of evacuations in Greenfield and Deerfield as a result of that event. And we had all kinds of problems and washed out roads and stuff. So I wanted to make sure you included the 2005. You could go back to the 2005, October of 2005 event. It was over Columbus Day weekend.
That was Tammy. I think that was Tropical Storm Tammy, wasn't it?
I can't remember. It was so long ago, but it was one where, I mean, your population densities are in Greenfield and Deerfield. And if the Connecticut's involved, then there's a lot more evacuation potential in Greenfield and definitely in Deerfield. But if it's just the Deerfield watershed, then like I said, the velocity, it just whooshes down the Connecticut and it's not really so much of an issue. But I know we based our MVP evacuation plans on, whether the Connecticut was involved or not. And that really is important for your communities of Deerfield and Greenfield on these events, what happens in our communities.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Carolyn.
Yeah.
Oh, so now we're getting to the fun part. I asked.
How dare you, Kimberly? The model development is the fun part.
Yeah. I think this is what I found so exciting when I came across the flood model. So
we certainly do too.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've got a couple slides here, and then I'll close the PowerPoint and we'll go take a look at a story map and the interactive web viewer that we developed for the Charles River flood model, which I think you're referring to. But so there's a number of deliverables, as Indrani mentioned, that come out of this type of project, and we're excited to do here. One of the main ones is a story map, right? Which sort of, rather than a 100-page report with a 5-page executive summary that would be difficult to get through, we like to produce a story map which tells a story in more lay terms, kind of incorporates a little bit of text with really instructive graphics. It's useful for all of us in understanding these complex and long projects, but they're also really helpful with regard to engagement and public education. So we love to do the story maps. I'll show the Charles one in a little bit. Actually, this is a number of them. And then there's an interactive web viewer. So communities and community leaders and just concerned citizens can kind of zoom into the areas that they care about and see flood risk under a range of sort of design storm size and climate scenario conditions. And also how some of the mitigation strategies and solutions that we come up with throughout this project, how the flooding extents and depths change as a result of those projects. And that's all incorporated into the flood viewer, which will take a few minutes to look at together. Before I sort of leave the presentation to go do that, to show and tell, there's a couple of other nice deliverables or outputs from this process. This is a nice example of one where, right, so this is the Charles River watershed. We broke it up into something like 40 different sub-watersheds. And the takeaway is that not all subbasins are created equal. Not all corners of a watershed respond the same way. And so what this shows is each kind of spoke on this wheel, it represents one of those subbasins. And the little radar plot in the middle shows the effectiveness of 5 different mitigation strategies, 5 different watershed-wide mitigation strategies. And we can see that, yes, the blue one, NBS 1A, which honestly, I don't remember exactly what that one was anymore. But NBS 1A was the most effective in most subbasins. And overall, on a watershed scale, it was the most effective. However, there were other strategies were more effective than NBS 1A, were more effective than the blue line in some watersheds. And so, or some sub-watersheds. So these communities, these sub-watersheds, they may want to focus on different strategies. So this is a really nice takeaway from this part of from this phase of the Charles project. And, you know, we envision producing something like that here. Then we tend to zoom in. With each phase, we zoom in a little bit more, right? So, you know, where first we might have looked at watershed-wide strategies, through that, we might identify priority sub-watersheds that maybe experience the greatest impacts or are most vulnerable to future climate scenarios, or maybe their soils and their land cover and whatever else make them particularly capable of being part of the solution. And so for whatever reason, we prioritize catchments or sub-watersheds, and we zoom in on those. And then we can look at individual solutions or individual opportunities for nature-based solutions, right? And this is an example of one we did in a catchment in Foxborough, Massachusetts, as part of our Neponset River flood model, where we've zoomed into this catchment. This is maybe 1/50th or 100th of the watershed. What we've zoomed in here, and now we're starting to see individual opportunities, right? Our design engineers can identify, they look at a wide range of things, and they try to identify different nature-based solutions that would be particularly effective in different areas. And then, right, those solutions are translated back into the model. And we run those through the model, and we can see their flood reduction benefits, not only in this catchment, but in catchments and communities further downstream. And so that's some of the output that, those are some of the deliverables that could come out of this project as well. And this is just a slide showing that, showing those flood reduction benefits for that Foxborough Mass catchment, right? There's 22.5 million gallons of runoff produced by that catchment today. During the 2-year event in 2070, that's going to increase to 34 million gallons, so something like a 50% increase. But if this particular suite of nature-based solutions is implemented, that runoff will be reduced not only back to present day, but beyond. We'll sort of turn back the clock. And so it achieves full mitigation and then some. So those are some of the deliverables that can come out of this model and out of this project. And if it's all right with folks, maybe pause here for a couple questions, and then I'll do a show and tell of the web viewer.
Andy, we've had quite a few questions come up in the chat. I've been answering some of those along. I think one of the pending questions that I don't have an immediate answer for, I don't know if we can answer that now, Andy, but the question is related to why no data is being gathered in Bernardston. And if you have an immediate answer, otherwise we can certainly report back on that question.
Yeah, let me go back up to I also don't have an immediate answer for that. I would say that I think what's happening in here is that I think we already have the information we need for Bernardston. the points we're showing are not all of the structures that have data gaps. There are top priority and our second priority sites. So we have other crossings and dams in the watershed that are very low priority because we have most of the data we need, and we have a good way to estimate the data we don't, or in fact, we have all of the data already. In all likelihood, we have most of the data we already need for the structures there.
I think what's difficult on this particular slide is that there's no legend to tell us what the different colors are. So that's sort of a question I have about this, but it didn't seem especially pertinent. So if you can just define that later on, that would be helpful.
Sure. Yeah, apologies. The colors are just the clusters of 10. We wanted to kind of show how we clustered some of the top priority areas. And then the hollow ones, the ones that are just black outlines with white centers, those are the lower priority sites that we would go to if we had time, but we don't expect to.
And again, the prioritization is not based on anything related to flood risks identification. It's based on data availability or lack thereof. So that's if there is a lack of data, that's why we're calling that as high priority.
Yep. Other questions from the chat, Indrani, before we take a look at the web viewer?
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I recently learned that groundwater levels are rising in Massachusetts, and I'm wondering how those can impact, if you consider that in the analysis, or if they're significant enough to impact the flood model.
Did my hydrogeologist boss pay you to say that?
No. Does he work at UMass?
No. We are familiar with that study. So
Okay.
I'm a hydrologist. I've worked with my boss for 15, 16 years. He's a hydrogeologist. So I'm the surface water guy. He's the groundwater guy. And we have a running joke about that.
Okay.
But yeah, no, it is a very real issue. We do not anticipate manipulating groundwater levels as part of this flood model. Certainly it's important. Certainly it's important from a watershed scale perspective. When we're looking at significant, some of the more significant storm events like your 10-year and your 100-year, the groundwater component plays oh God, my boss is going to kill me, a relatively small part of identifying flood risk. But it does have important components on sort of everyday conditions or nuisance flooding, the more common flooding that we get, during every or every other rainfall event. There's some really, really important impacts from groundwater rise, but from a flood perspective, less so.
And I would say too, that in Greenfield, where Jessica works, if we were looking at any infiltration, stormwater management, projects or techniques like that would probably be that, we would need to be aware of the groundwater levels and, whether or not they were going to rise. For some of these larger flood resiliency projects that we're looking at, like in the hill towns, or other areas where it's more like slowing the flow, floodplain reconnection, things like that, rising groundwater levels would probably, play a much smaller role in that case. But anywhere there's like development and you're looking at infiltration, for stormwater management, groundwater levels are definitely something that, plays into the design or whether or not it's a suitable best management practice.
That's a really great point, Kimberly. When we start to zoom in on particular catchments and particular opportunities or solutions, nature-based solutions, that you're exactly right. That's where we'll start to look harder at infiltration, and we can certainly be thinking about how that may change under future climate.
Thank you.
See, Carolyn has a question, and then there's a question in the chat related to where the data would come from related to the effectiveness of nature-based solutions. So
actually, it's not really too much of a question. I just wanted to make sure we had about $15 million worth of damage after the July 23 storm. So I'm not sure if your culvert information is 100% up to date, if it's not the new data from, after 2023, because a lot of our culverts were replaced because they're literally washed out.
Yeah, so Carolyn, maybe you and I we can have a meeting about that, and I can go over things with you and make sure I have the most up-to-date info. Thanks for that reminder.
Great, thank you. There was one more in the chat.
Yeah, so in terms of the data for the effectiveness of nature-based solutions, it's a great question, Star. I think we are at where we are in the project now. We are, as sort of Kimberly alluded to it right now in her response, like we're still explaining. We're understanding how the model development is happening. We want to make sure that the model that we develop is the best available one based on the best available topographic and climate and bathymetric data that we have available. We will use that to characterize flood risk. Then when we start diving into understanding what flood mitigation strategies and nature-based solutions are going to be most effective in this part of the watershed, in this watershed, we will be looking at impervious cover data. We will be looking at depth to groundwater data at specific locations where available. We'll be looking at slopes. We'll be looking at, sort of impervious and land use types go hand in hand. We will be looking at possible opportunities where projects sort of next to each other can be combined, like other projects that are being planned. We want to make sure that they're not in conflict with anything else that the community already is planning, or if we can bolster an existing project. So some of those are going to be evaluated as we assess effectiveness of nature-based solutions. But in terms of like assessing the effectiveness, flood reduction effectiveness of the nature-based solutions, we will certainly be using this model as a tool. What we are setting up now, what Andy described, is characterizing flood risk, but also this model will be used as a tool to say how much of that flooding, if we do this river restoration project, or if we do this reduction of impervious area or provide this additional storage, what would that yield in terms of flood reduction?
Five minutes remaining. Let me do a quick show and tell of this, the web viewer and the story maps. I just posted in the chat there a link to this site. It's a nice example of both these types of deliverables. And you can play around with it. This is the web viewer. So if you come to this website and you just scroll down a little bit, you'll find it. And you can see there's the watershed boundary. You can see the individual sub-watersheds are shown in the green polygons. There's 40 or so of them in this watershed. You keep zooming in, other layers start coming on. These are the critical infrastructure, right? These are water supplies and fire stations and things like that. And there's a number of reference layers. So up here in the top right, a number of the reference layers are already on, but you can add others. Like you can turn on our model conduits. You can turn on the 2D mesh footprint. The extents of the 2D mesh that were incorporated into this model. You can FEMA flood hazard areas, all kinds of reference layers that you can turn on. EJ communities. And then this button here gives you access to the results. So I can look at, for instance, I can look at the 100-year storm of today. You guys see all these blue polygons? Let me move to a more interesting area. Here we go. Right, so you can see all the light blue to dark blue polygons. There's a legend over here that tells you approximately how deep the flooding is in these areas. And you can also click on them. You just click, it'll tell you the maximum depth of flooding during this event and the water surface elevation. So you can see over here, right? This is much more shallow. This is like less than a foot, quarter of a foot, versus here in the channel, it's 2 feet. And you can turn on multiple events at once. So you can do here, you can see I'm turning on and off the 2070 100-year. So you can see that you can see areas where there's new flooding. You can also see areas where there will be more intense flooding. Another way to do this is with this fun feature. So you can swipe different layers. Oops, I need to turn on, let me turn this one on. Okay. Oop. There we go. So I can go like this, and if I swipe to the right, it's the 2070 year. If I swipe to the left, it's the 100 year of today. So you can zoom way out, or you can zoom into your particular neighborhood, right? You can zoom in and see the differences expected at all different kinds of scales everywhere in the watershed that was modeled. There's also other groups of model results over here, right? This top group, these are just the no actions, but there's also ones for watershed scale solutions that we looked at. They have different, this is the last year's work, so we ran 3. There's something called the Watertown rule that was very effective, but we have some of those solutions are shown here, and you can compare them to no action to see how effective they are and where they're most effective. So that's kind of what you can find in the web viewer. Very quickly, I've got 2 of the story maps. If you just keep going down to the bottom, you'll find links to these story maps. But here's one about sort of model development, and you can see it's just a nice combination of maps and graphics, a little bit of text, and it just tells the story of the project in a really concise and clean way, easily digestible, and like I said before, a really effective tool for outreach and education for folks living and working in the watershed. So I absolutely encourage you to check out these examples. These are the types of deliverables we're envisioning for this project.
Great. Thank you so very much,
Of course.
Andy and Indrani. It was, and thank you all to the members of the Resilient Deerfield River Watershed Coalition for your great questions, all the great information in the chat. We will be following up to post all of this information on the project's webpage, and so we can remind you about the link to the story maps and the interactive web viewer for the Charles River Watershed model. So I don't know if there were any last minute comments or questions before we end the meeting.
Thank you.
Really great work. Very impressive. Thank you.
Thanks.
I
Very
think it'll
nice
be
to meet
exciting to
everybody.
have the information.
Yeah.
Is there anyone here who didn't get the papers in the mail last week? The maps and the homework, or have questions about those? Oh, Star, you have a question?
I was wondering if it would be okay if I used a much larger map that I have from a recent master plan update. It has all of our parcels along the river. I don't know, this is like very tight for us to mark up. That's our village center there, and everything's overlapping. It just seems like it's a little bit small, and I was wondering if I can use a large map and maybe take some pictures of it and send that to you.
Sure.
I think that's fine.
Yeah. And we can stay, Audrey and I can stay on for a few minutes because we did want to check in about the homework and also about the, if there were any questions about the stipends for the volunteers. I don't want to hold Indrani and Andrew here if we don't have any more questions for them. All right, I think you're
Thank you very much for this
Thank you.
opportunity to work on this project. We really appreciate this. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you
everybody.
so
Nice meeting you.
much.
Thanks
All
very
right.
much.
Bye. Yeah, so we just wanted to check in with everyone and make sure that, yeah, you didn't have any questions about the homework. Make sure everybody got their packet, and also to see if you had any questions about those of you who are eligible for the stipends for the volunteer members. Paid town staff, like town administrators, aren't eligible for that, so you wouldn't have received that information. But since we are closing out this fiscal year, it will be important to get that paperwork back to me so I can distribute the payments and have all my paperwork in hand prior to the end of the fiscal year.
I have a question on the
Yes.
homework.
Yes, Jessica.
So I feel like the map's gonna get really cluttered. So would it make sense to write like a number and then have a document that corresponds to the number with all the information about that location?
Perfect.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, anything that's easier for you guys to do is good. We just wanted to provide some type of resource if you didn't have one, but if you have something else that's better, that's fine too.
Okay, great. Well, I appreciate you sending that.
Yeah.
And you folks need this by the 30th, right?
We were hoping that to do that just so we can keep kind of the momentum going with Weston and Sampson's work. If you need a little bit more time, just let us know. I mean, we'd rather have it come in a little late and be more robust, right? Than send it in by the deadline and be missing some important information.
It's going to be a little challenging for me, just FYI. So I'll do my best to get it to you as soon thereafter as possible.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Tricia, and we totally understand. Yeah.
Hi, Kim.
Hi, Dee. How are you? Nice to see you.
Thanks. I just had somebody in my office that I am trying to get to sit on this committee. So she said she might be interested in Nina Martin Anzoni. You might
I know
remember
Nina. Yeah, she
She's
used
the
to
chair
work
of
at
the
the
Board of
pod.
Health. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
great.
I am working on that. But in the meantime, I did do the homework, the maps and everything. So I'll just drop them off at some point in the next day or so.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dee.
Thanks.
Really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else have any questions?
I guess this is really just a hard copy of the interactive map, right? Like, will you just be inputting that stuff into the interactive map that you have online?
So yeah, we'll gather all of this information and then talk to Weston and Sampson about whether or not they need it for the actual model runs now, or if we'll use this as contextual information for when we run the simulations and start talking about the different projects. And also, it's good to kind of knit together all of this information across the watershed so that when we're looking at opportunities for cross, the watersheds that are shared by our towns, we can have that conversation. So the data potentially has multiple uses.
I really just meant like, is this hard copy map, will you be inputting this stuff into the interactive map? Like, is it sort of the same thing?
It depends. I mean, I want to say yes, probably most of it, but Weston and Sampson, will be the ultimate deciders about that. So I think if there's something that you feel very strongly about, or is a very important piece of information, I would just note that, yeah.
Okay.
So any other questions or comments or thoughts? Audrey, I don't think we haven't set a next meeting date yet, right?
No, yeah, we have to sit down and sort of plan our next few meetings. We still want to do that field outing in September, but we might have a meeting before that online. So I guess you'll just wait to hear from us. And now that I have permissions to edit the website, we'll get this presentation as well as the May presentation in slides up sooner rather than later. And then you'll just hear from us about when our next meeting is going to be. It'll probably be at the same time in
Right,
August.
we have been doing like the third Thursday of the month, right?
Yeah. I imagine
From-
we'll continue that in August. I'm not sure about July.
Yeah, but we'll try to figure that out on our end pretty quickly. And we understand that it's summertime, people have vacation plans, etc. So, but we had a great turnout today, which was really exciting. A lot of new folks joined in from other towns, so very happy to see that. All right, well, thanks for hanging in there for the full hour and 40 minutes. I'm super excited about this model, and I hope you all are too. And yeah, I look forward to seeing you at our next meeting, and unless I see you before then, which probably some of you I will, Carolyn. All right.
Thanks so much, you guys. Everybody take care.